What's up, guys? Episode 3 of the Richmond Elite podcast coming at you today with Coach Jared, Coach Matt. Today we got a few talking points that we want to go through, but today is going to be kind of just a conversation about some of the things that we kind of see in the, training world and like the sports performance world, and some of the myths maybe out there, and some of the things that we don't like. Things that we think that needs to change. So
yeah, definitely. I think we're starting to realize it a lot more now that like we're in the heart of school and season a lot more, right? Like these things that we're talking about and these things that we're seeing a lot more is just you don't really even see them in summer because kids have less to do, right? And so like kind of hits them like a train when they come back to training and going back to school full time too. Right. But so I mean, there's a lot of stuff now that I've seen compared to like when summer was in session. You know what I mean? It's a completely different ball game now. But
and it's football season, so I love football, but their injuries do happen. Yeah. In sports and especially in football, and so one of the things that we're having to deal with as a gym, and I know that a lot of athletes, I mean, every single athlete probably deals with at some point, is going to be training, through and around injuries that they've had. And sometimes athletes just don't train through them or don't train around them, right? And they just kind of do nothing. And I think we can all agree that's probably the worst thing that you can do. Oh, yeah. So, I mean, I don't know, man. You wrestled in college for 4 years, and you wrestled, I don't know how many years before that. Like,
a long time, yeah. Right. I wrestled since I was 3.
You've had, so. I'm sure you've had your fair share of injuries, right?
Yeah. I mean, my coaches always said, like, there's not going to be a day where you feel 100% perfect. Like there's just not going to ever be a day where there is not one little thing in your body that doesn't feel, a little off, or maybe, whatever it may be. But it's just like whether or not you let those things kind of control you and control your career, right? Like there's so many little things that athletes probably don't even know that they like kind of push away because it doesn't benefit them at all. Mm-hmm. But it's like then this one thing like injury, which is honestly one of the worst things to endure as an athlete, at least in my perspective. Sure. Because it's like taking away the one thing that you actually, kind of like are motivated to work towards maybe. But it's like they kind of welcome an injury more to kind of put them away from that goal. It's almost like weird, right? But
so I feel like I have a good perspective on this. So real early in my weightlifting career, like pretty much right when I started, I was self-taught and I didn't have a coach. This is why you should have a coach. And I was just like watching YouTube videos and trying to teach myself how to lift. And I got really strong really quickly, but my technique was absolutely horrible. And I ended up breaking my wrist doing a clean, right? And this was I was 19 years old. It was my freshman year of college. Basically, when I went off to college, I got strong. I wanted to come home and show all my high school friends how strong I'd gotten. So we went to the high school weight room, and I was doing a clean, and I had no form. I mean, my technique was absolutely horrible, and my elbow came down, hit my knee, and the bar kept going, right? So you can kind of picture that, right?
Yeah.
And my wrist broke, and I knew I'd never broken a bone up to that point, but people are like, so my buddy Cody had driven me to the gym, and I was like, hey man, we got to go. I broke my wrist. Like, and it's funny because a lot of people in the gym heard it, like they heard it snapping. This is kind of a crazy story. So then on the way home, I called my now wife, at the time girlfriend, Becca, and I was like, hey, I just broke my wrist. I need to go to the doctor. And she's like, no way. And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, how do you know? Right? I'm like, I know, I promise. And she's like, well, that sucks because I had just bought you a gym membership for the summer to.
Oh, no way.
But check this out. It was to Quad City CrossFit, which was this gym.
Oh, no way.
Yes.
Wow, that's kind of crazy.
Right, that is right. Really crazy,
small world.
right?
That's a small world.
And anyway, so my birthday, I broke my wrist on May 15th. My birthday was on May 20th. So she had bought me this gym membership for the summer at Quad City CrossFit to train for the summer because I had gotten big into it. And anyway, she was able to call and they gave her a refund. They were really cool about it, I think. But yeah, so I went to the doctor. They were like, yep, sure enough, you got a broken wrist. And I was in a cast. They were like, unfortunately, the bone that you broke just so happens to be a bone that takes a really long time to heal. Wow. So it's your scaphoid. It's just this little bone in your wrist. Pretty common to break when you fall, stuff like that. Luckily, I broke it just straight in half. I mean, it was a pretty clean break. So I just was casted. I was casted. I had a thumb, and then up to the elbow.
Never had a cast. I've heard those are just like the worst thing ever.
Well, so yeah, I mean it sucks. So then I had to like I was working for my dad over the summer doing siding and like I had like I was the cut man, so I'd like hold the siding and then I would get like metal shavings and stuff in my cast. But anyways, I figured out a way to train, and so I couldn't really do anything upper body, right? So I just went on the internet, and again, don't do this, but like I just want you to get the idea from it. But like I went on the internet, found like the hardest squat program or like that I could find, and it's called Smolov. So a lot of people have probably heard of this program. You squat 4 times per week, and it's very high volume. So like just an example, like the first part of the program, day 1, you do 4 sets of 9, or I believe, right? Yeah, 4 sets of 9 squats at a weight, right, at a fixed percentage. Then the next day that you train, which is like either the next day or maybe in 2 days, you do 5 sets of 7. Then you do the next day is 7 sets of 5, and then it's 10 sets of 3, right? Yeah, and it's all like a pretty high percentage. But anyways, I literally couldn't do anything else, so I'm like, I'm just gonna do this program, right? So I literally just did that program, and I did it all summer. So I think it's like a 12-week program. And my squat went from, I think at the time it was like 305. It was not very good. I didn't like squat. You know, nobody likes to squat, right? No. Especially when you first start out training. And my squat went up like 100 pounds. I think it was close to like 400 by the end of the summer. So anyways, that really ended up helping my weightlifting career long term. But kind of my whole philosophy on it was like, okay, well, I'm going to try to not train any less than what I'm currently training.
Right.
I'm just going to replace the training that I now can't do with more of the training that I can do. Right. And it just so happened that the training that I could do was like my biggest weakness. And so it worked out really well for me. And that way it like forced me to do the thing that I didn't like to do. Right. So
those are the best things for you.
Right. And so anyways, I just think like whenever you get hurt, just remember it's an opportunity to kind of specialize in something else for a period of time and not feel guilty about it. Like not feel like you're like neglecting another part of your body, right? It's like I literally could not train like, you know, my upper body essentially, like in certain ways. Like of course I could do certain things, but a lot of the things that like a bench press or a strict press or any sort of like snatch, clean jerk, couldn't do it, right? So I didn't have to feel guilty about not doing it while I put all my energy into like training my legs.
Right.
So I think athletes could take away something from that and just say like, you know, hey, when you get injured, it's just an opportunity to think about like, okay, well, what can I do? Now I'm just going to do more of that thing.
Yeah, right. And it's like when you were talking about it, I'm thinking the whole time, like there was never a thought in your head like, oh, I'm just going to take this time off. Like, I'm just going to be done and just like wait until I'm healthy or whatever. Because imagine like if you would have done the opposite and how much worse you would have gotten at your like respective sport if you would have just taken that whole time off, right?
Exactly.
Like you got a lot stronger in your squat because you did it the whole time you were hurt. But if you didn't, like imagine how much weaker you would have been when you came back. You know what I mean? It's like crazy how fast people think it takes a long time for it to like come back, but it goes away even faster. Like you can lose your ability to be strong or, you know, be agile or whatever that is so fast if you take time away from the gym when you're hurt, just because you feel like, I don't know. So a lot of people want like the safety net of not having to do anything and using that like as their injury almost, right? So it's like, I don't have to go do these things now because I'm hurt, you know? So yeah, it's different because like you said, you know, when I got hurt in my college career, it was a lot more like, you know, what I could do outside of it. And a lot of it was, you know, I hurt my leg or I fully tore my right calf and sprained my MCL. So I was out for 4.5 weeks, I think. And every single day I was on an Echo bike, Airdyne bike, one leg doing sprints on there, right?
Which, here's the thing though, you wouldn't have been on that every day probably as much if you hadn't hurt yourself.
Yeah, no shot.
Right. And I think that's the way you have to justify it to yourself and you have to think about it because otherwise you'll just go crazy. Like I would have been like depressed.
Right.
Because I was really ambitious at the time, right? I was really into it and I could easily, I was less than a year into the sport, right? I really hadn't just gotten started. I could have very easily just been like, yeah, I think I'm just done with this sport, right? I've never competed in it. I got injured doing it. Like, you know, I think a lot of kids are like, oh, I got hurt doing the sport. It's the sport's fault. I'm going to blame the sport. I'm not going to do the sport anymore, right? Or again, they're going to kind of milk the injury, right? Again, I'm not trying to sound like, oh, I'm super tough. It was more just like I didn't want to feel any worse about like, I'm a person who thrives on productivity, right? And so I felt like I was still able to be very productive towards my progress by just taking the things that I could do and doing them more often. I think that's like the whole key is like, okay, when you get injured, don't just stop training, just do the things that you can do and
Right.
do it more often.
I think that like a lot of it too is it's so routine based for a lot of guys, at least when I was an athlete competing, like everything was so routine based, right? You go to school for, this long throughout a day, and then you go to practice for this long throughout a day, right? So a lot of times when injuries happen and they feel like that routine gets broken, I feel like that's when they like mentally kind of shut down more and they kind of
You're
like
fine.
take a break from everything.
Going.
But I think it's like a lot more mental than the athletes think too when they get hurt, right? They think, oh, like I'm hurt, it's physical. I just got to like worry about the physical pain that I'm having rather than like, okay, but mentally, how am I doing like based off this injury? Am I becoming a better athlete or a worse athlete because of it? Or am I not training as much because of it, right? So
Right.
a lot more in-depth side on the mental thing is like, it's not just how much one spot hurts on your body, right? It's like how you kind of react to it as well.
And you
So
learn a lot from injuries. Like
Yeah.
for me, I learned that you can squat more than once a week and your legs aren't going to fall off, right? I learned that, you can, how to rehab. Like when I got out of the cast, dude, my wrist was, it was very tight. Like it felt worse than when it was in the cast because I was trying to do stuff with it. But I mean, I was in a cast for almost 3 months, right? Or probably 3 months. And, so anyways, I learned how to kind of work around that. I learned like things that I need, like mobilization techniques, right? If I've hurt my back before, I've hurt other things, and it's like I've learned how to stretch, I've learned how to mobilize, I've learned how to warm up properly, right? And if I didn't get injured, I would have not learned those things, right? There's a book, Stuart McGill, I think Dr. Stuart McGill, he wrote a book with another guy, and it's called The Gift of Injury. And it's kind of like the idea is like, when this guy got injured, he learned how to rehab it and then what was required of him to stay healthy as he got older, right? And so I think, there can be a lot of gifts taken away from injury that a lot of people don't realize,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely,
So,
absolutely. Yeah, and I think kind of transitioning off of that, the next thing, which kind of goes hand in hand with in-season stuff, is injuries and stuff like that, is training in season versus out of season, right? And like I think a lot of times people think they're going to get hurt if they train in season, right? Like too much, right? Like, oh, I don't want to burn out, I don't want to, get injured lifting and then not be able to play football, or I don't want whatever it may be. So, I think that we're starting to see that a lot more now that school's kind of in session too. It's probably the biggest thing outside of like the dealing with injuries, is like the training in season. So I know you got a lot to talk about on that, man. So
yeah, I mean, one, it's just it's incorrect to think that you're more likely to get injured not training in season than training in season. Let me explain why. So the whole reason that we train, or one of the main reasons we train, is to build the capacity of certain tissues in our body, right? So capacity just means like the ability to withstand, right? Like the ability to withstand a certain amount of force, or to tolerate, right, a certain amount of weight that you lift, or a certain amount of impact on a joint, whatever, right? Well, as you train, you build your tolerance, you build your capacity of certain joints, right? Like, for example, if I tried to squat 500 pounds the first day that I ever picked up a bar, and I went all the way down with it, my knees probably would have exploded.
Yeah.
Right? Like legitimately.
Yeah.
I probably would like have been dead.
Yeah.
But like after training for 5 years, I was able to do that. Right? So I built up a capacity. Well, the point is like that capacity the whole reason we do that is because that capacity carries over to, let's say you're playing football and you get hit really hard, or you get put in a weird like position that's similar to a squat, like where your knee is really flexed, and the person puts a lot of force into that joint. Well, if you can squat 400 pounds, that force is probably not going to hurt you, right? That amount of force, versus if you can squat 100 pounds, that force is a lot more likely to hurt you, right? So the point is if you stop training in season, that capacity actually goes back down, right? And you're not used to it a lot of times. Like you're used to starting out the season with like this high capacity or this high tolerance for, impact, or, muscular tissue, force, being able to withstand that amount of force. And now you can't, right? Now you're weaker, and your tissues, aren't as adapted to those forces. So that's the main thing. You are actually far more likely to get injured if you stop training in season.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's the other thing. So a sport is at least probably 3 months long,
Yeah,
right? Most
yeah.
sports are at least like 3 months long. If you're playing just let's say one sport a year and you don't train in season, you're only training, 3 quarters of the year. You're missing
Yeah.
a whole quarter of the year. So let's say, you're in high school and you train from freshman year to senior year. If you miss a quarter of a year of training for 4 years, you just accumulated a full year of missed training.
Right. Yep.
Okay, I guarantee you that the guys better than you are not doing that.
No.
Can you think about like a whole year of training? I mean, you're missing a whole year of training, right?
Yeah.
So then, let's say you play 2 sports, and now you're only training for 6 months,
Right.
right? And let's talk about again 4 years of that. Now you just trained half of what another guy trained. You missed 2 years of training, right?
Yep.
And so you guys kind of see the point. And like we have athletes play 3 sports. 4 sports. Like if you don't train in season, you ain't never gonna train, right? Like you're gonna miss out on a ton of training that is required to get better. So that's a big part.
Right.
Of it.
And honestly, if you like the way that I think about it is if you really care enough about the sport, you'll do those things that you need to do, right? You need to train in season. Like there was no really other option for a lot of those top athletes because that's just what they wanted to do. Like they knew if I need to get to a certain spot in my life or in this sport, like I need to do these things now. Otherwise I'm just never going to get there,
Right.
But
and I think it's also like, the whole reason that we get a lot of times for people not training in season is like, well, they want to be fresh for the games, right?
Yep.
And I think they need to start thinking about it like, what are we peaking for? Like, do we want to be good now or do we want to be good like in 4 years, right? Well, one, you're going to adapt to like, if you, like we have athletes that train the day before games, right? And training might be slightly different than if it wasn't the day before a game, right? But like you're young. First of all, these athletes are generally very young, very healthy. And then also like you adapt to it. Like, for example, I actually, when I'm training for a weightlifting meet, I like to train the day before the meet. Like my body feels better at the meet if I do a little bit of something and I move a little bit, right? Yeah. I've tried it both ways where I take a full day off before the meet. I don't feel as good.
Right.
So I like to get a little bit of training in. And so the whole idea with that is like, there's 2 things that when we train, we build our fitness. Fitness, I know in most people's brains, just is just like, oh, your ability to like, run and like kind of be generally fit, right? Yeah. But in strength and conditioning, fitness just means your ability to perform a task. Okay. So like my level of fitness for football is just my ability to play football at the highest level that I'm capable of playing. Then we have something called fatigue. Okay. So in training, we are building fitness, but we're also building fatigue many times if we're training hard. Okay. The fatigue is going up because we're, accumulated fatigue, right? Well, the idea of like peaking essentially is like kind of decaying the fatigue. So trying to get the fatigue to go down while the fitness stays high. But it's really hard to do because if we don't train, as the fatigue decays, our fitness decays as well, right? Think about it like if you play football for a full year, at the end of the year, you're better at football than at the beginning of the year, but you're probably tired from the year too and beat up from the year.
Yeah.
Right. So there's this balance that you have to play. Now, here's the thing though. You shouldn't even be peaking for, in my opinion, anything in high school. Right. Like if your goals especially are beyond high school, right? It's like, so if you want to be a good collegiate, player, and whether it's football, wrestling, basketball, whatever, and you're going to miss a full year of training over the course of 4 years, right? Just so that you are a little bit fresher for your games. Right. It's like, well, you're sacrificing, some long-term progression because you want to be at your absolute, like feeling your absolute best tomorrow. Right. And I don't think people realize that.
Yeah. And I think, kind of going off of that too, it's like, we understand that you have a game tomorrow. Like we understand that you're in season. Like it's not like we don't know these things, right? It's not like we're like, oh, this person's coming in, they got a game tomorrow, let's make sure they're really sore for their game tomorrow, right? Like no, like we know how to put you in the best position possible for your game, right? And that's kind of like the trust part on our end a little bit. Like you got to trust us to know that we have your best interest for every competition in mind, right? So like we're not just going to forget about your competition because you have it tomorrow and we feel like you need to do something, right? But we don't like take away from your training just because we have a game tomorrow or just because of like, one singular competition. Because like you said, we're worried about long-term development as an athlete rather than just like that short-term success. And I think they go hand in hand. If you're worried about if you're focused on growing over time, then I think your short-term success comes with that too. Right.
I don't know about like wrestling, but in weightlifting, we call it training through meets. So okay, there was like 2 big meets, national meets a year that I would generally like peak for.
Right.
That's the American Open and Nationals. Any other meet that I did, if it was like a local meet or whatever, I would just train through it. And what that means is like, so peaking for a meet, or if you peak for a game, right, you would drop your training volume, right? You would still train because you want to keep your fitness as high as possible, but you would drop the volume in order to try to decay the fatigue, right? So it's like if you were going to play basketball, the day before the game, you maybe wouldn't play as hard. You would still shoot, right? You would still like do those things, but you wouldn't like go quite as hard, right?
For sure.
It's kind of the same idea. But then, so I would do that for the big meets, but then on like the smaller meets, the meets I didn't have as much of a emphasis on or priority for, I would just train through them. So I would literally if I had a hard day of training on Friday and I competed on Saturday, I would do that normal hard day of training on Friday. And then I would go compete on Saturday. And you want to know some of the craziest things? Some of those meets were my best meets.
Yeah, that's
and this is what people don't even realize. One, I think I took some of the pressure off myself. Like, okay, these aren't as big of a meet. So that's part of it. But then part of it is like, you just don't like, everybody wants to think like just because you train hard one day means the next day you're going to automatically be like worse. And it's just like, it's just not reality.
No, it's
like,
not.
Some of the days I've got to training that I feel the worst are some of my best days.
Yeah, that's what I feel like when like we talk about, everybody hates running, right? I don't like running, but like some of the times when I don't feel like I'm gonna have a good run at all, like I run the fastest I ever have. It's so crazy how it works, but it's almost like I think it's sometimes like my body telling me that I'm just overthinking too much too. You know what I mean?
So,
like you're just thinking about it too much.
Like we get kids in that are like, hey, I'm really tired today, or like I'm really sore today, or I have a game tomorrow. Like they're always prefacing.
Yeah.
Right. Like, hey, this is like, so don't expect, like essentially what they're saying is like, don't expect anything crazy today. And I'm like, here's the thing. Noted. One, I noted that.
Yeah.
But 2, don't put that like out there. Don't like put that on yourself of like, I'm automatically not going to be strong today simply because I'm sore from yesterday, or because I'm tired, or because of this, or because of that, or like I'm sick or whatever. Like I'm telling you, you just don't know. Just come in and, put in the work and see what the day has to offer. Like you don't have to like go in and like automatically just say today's not going to be a good day.
Yeah, absolutely. I have actually a really good kind of analogy off that. My coach always used to say it's about like, he used like an airport or airplanes as an example, and baggage, like your baggage that you take onto an airplane. So he's like, at an airport, there are people that their sole job is to take your baggage and to put it somewhere else. Because otherwise, if you bring it onto the plane, it's detrimental to your health and to other people's health, right? It's kind of a contagious thing. So he always said, there was 110 steps from the front door of our complex to the wrestling room. He said in those 110 steps, everything that's going on outside of your wrestling career, school, girlfriends, whatever it may be, you drop that baggage off and you let somebody else deal with it for that hour. And then you go into the wrestling room, you only worry about how good you can get at wrestling for that hour. And then that baggage you can pick up after your flight, right? So I always took that to heart. Like, I felt like if I come into work even and I'm like worried about everything else in my life, then like you're going to be affected by it. Reese is the athlete, like everyone around me is going to be affected by it. And then everybody gets worse that day. That's how I kind of think about it. So the baggage thing always helped me. Like, there's 10 steps from your car to the front door of rep. Can you drop off all your baggage in those 10 steps and get better in that hour? So I think the baggage gets brought in a lot, basically.
Right. And I think what I would add to that is like, so then you're getting as good as you can be to where when that baggage is no longer there, you're going to be happy that you left it there, and like you put in the work still, because it's like at some point that baggage is going to go away.
Yeah,
right.
For sure.
Or that soreness is going to go away. One of the things I always tell people is like, if we never trained when we were sore, like one, we would probably hardly ever train. Right. But 2, it's like, if we only trained on our good days, so like, when you first start training, you hit a lot of PRs, right? Like you hit PRs all the time. Well, at some point, relatively quickly, you stop PRing every day, right? And what I have to explain to people is like, just because you didn't PR today doesn't mean that this workout was not worth it. the reason you're going to PR the next time, or maybe in a couple workouts, is because you did these workouts where you didn't PR,
Right. Yep.
right? And I think that's really hard for kids to understand. It's like, they're like, I failed today, I didn't PR. And it's like, no. It's the same thing of like, I had a bad game.
Yeah.
Well, the only reason you're going to have a good game in a couple games is because you played that game and you learned from that game, right? If you didn't have a bad game then the game that's about to be a good game wouldn't be a good game. It would be a bad game because you haven't learned the things that you needed to learn from the bad game to have the good game.
Yep.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so it's the same idea with training. It's like you have to go through the bad days to get to the good days. So I know this has kind of been a philosophical episode, but just some of the like things that we're seeing with some of our athletes, and not, most of our athletes are doing a great job every day. It's just, some of the things that we like here and there that we deal with, now that school's back in session and stuff like that.
Yeah. And I think more so letting the athletes or our athletes know that like we understand that what they're going through. You know what I mean? Like we get it for sure. And we're only giving them this advice or going off of this because we've experienced it before too. You know what I mean? Like we were both in school. We both did sports while we were in school. We both had injury. I mean, all these things that we've been talking about today are experiences that we've learned both in like a positive and negative light in our own careers. And so now we're able to kind of give, and it's not like we're saying this is the right way and the only way, right? But it's like, we are giving you this advice because we've made mistakes in our own careers that like we probably regret and wish that we could take back. And a lot of it is, based off of how we trained in season, at least for me,
100%.
Being in wrestling, focused on like cutting weight a lot more than like getting strong all the time. Right. So I think like these things, these experiences that we've gone through in our careers are the reasons why we're so like passionate about telling our athletes that, because if I could skip these, little things that I didn't know back then, I feel like I would be way further ahead than every athlete going into like college. You know what I mean?
If I knew the things that I knew now, like, and that's what I hope our athletes are able to take away is like, everything that we're telling them is stuff that we wish that not somebody would have told us, but maybe because maybe they did, but something we would have listened to and like took to heart, right?
I'm sure I was told probably
exactly.
Before. Yeah,
and here's the thing: like the only thing you can't get back, like the only thing in life in general, is time, right? And so I think the big thing is what we're saying is like when you don't train during the season, you're wasting time that you don't like, especially if you're trying to go play a college sport, like. You have till you're a senior in high school to make that happen. Yeah. Right. You don't get to like, do a red shirt year.
Right.
And,
I mean, look at Ryan Williams. That kid's 17 years old, man. He's destroying D1 defenses like crazy. You don't think that guy works out in season, out of season, all year round? You know what I mean? Like, and he's 17 years old. So that's a good example of like how kids now can see, that guy's probably working out every single day, in season, out of season. He's 17, early enrolled into college, and is killing everybody in SEC defenses. It's wild to see. But
yeah, he's a stud.
He's going to be really good, I think. Same with that guy from who was
Ohio
it?
State.
Ohio State. Yeah,
Jeremiah Smith. Yeah, he's a dog.
He's crazy too.
He's a dog.
These younger kids now are just like so different than like I don't feel like I've ever seen this much young talent at like such a high level.
Right.
Especially in football, I feel like. But the reclassing thing's a whole thing too. Yeah. So
anyways, kind of recap this, I would just say like you got to train in season.
Yeah.
Like if you're serious about being an athlete, you have to train in season. Like it's not a maybe. It's not a like it is required.
You don't have an option. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I just don't understand. Like you wouldn't if you want to go play like college basketball. Like you're not going to like take months off of not shooting a basketball. Like you're just not like, and here's the thing with that, that's a skill, and skills are actually much easier to reacquire. Right. Or like you get rusty, right? Than like literal muscular tissue.
Yeah, like you have to build
you are
that.
literally losing tissue on your body, right? Like when you don't train, like your muscles are starting to atrophy, right? So you're literally losing tissue on your body that you worked really hard to build. Skill is all neurological, right? It's all brain, right?
Absolutely.
So we can get that back pretty quick. The muscle stuff, man, that we work hard for that. Let's not lose it, right? And you can maintain, dude. So there's like been a lot of research, and like once you've built the muscle, if you just want to maintain it, you can actually maintain like the muscle that you built with. I want to say they've done research to where it's like as little as like 1/8 of the training volume that you did to get it. The point is like we could bump we can bump our training down a little bit if we have to. We can train a little bit less frequently if we want to just maintain more, which why are we trying to just maintain, right, in high school? Like, that's okay.
Because they're still growing too.
Exactly.
Like you're not just like a fully like developed or like adult athlete at that time, right? Like your body is still going through a process as well.
I think what a part of it is like people look at what professional athletes do, or even college athletes, and my coach used to say, do what you're like the athlete that you idolize, train like they trained when they were at your stage, not how they train now.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what we do. We look at how they train now and they're like, I'm going to go train like that. Right. And what they do now, one, is not necessarily correct. Right. But two, is not how they got to that point.
Yeah.
Those are very different. Right.
Right.
Now, like, for example, like, if our athletes looked at how I train now, I would not look at how I train now, right? Like, trust me, I'm 29 and my body's a lot more beat up than it used to be. My goals are different. Don't train like I train now. Train like I trained when I was 18, 19, 20, 21, like those ages. Like I was an animal and I was in the gym training really hard, right? And so again, just make sure that you're not looking at like this. So some of your favorite professional athletes may be on more of a maintenance level, right? Because here's the thing, at that level, you're training really hard to just not get worse.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I always talk about like Katie Ledecky or like a Michael Phelps or any Olympic athlete that's been to multiple Olympics. Like they are, they're not PRing necessarily from Olympic to Olympic. Like sometimes they are by maybe a fraction of a second, but a lot of times they're just training really hard to not get worse. Right. And I think, they're also trying to stay healthy. As you get older, that is a little bit tougher to do. Right. But when you're young, it's like, that is your time to put in the work. Right.
Yeah.
And that is your time to don't waste. Like you never get to be 18 twice. You never get to be 17 twice. Like those are prime ages, especially through these puberty ages where, your hormones are raging, right? Yeah. It's like, those are the times to really train hard and don't miss that window if you can help it.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of the problems that I run into with athletes too is like, the circle around them kind of affects them as well, right? Like with the fact of maybe their friends aren't as serious about sports as them, or maybe like they don't want to have the same goals as them when it comes to sports and athletics, and so they kind of go a different route in their high school careers, whether that's like going to party or so that's going and not sacrificing certain things for your sport, right? So I think that's a big thing too now, where it's like you can't let like anyone around you affect you whatsoever, because there's, especially now, I feel like people don't have your best interest. They have their own best interest a lot of the time,
everybody does,
right? So you got to find people that do,
sure,
right? And a lot of times the people that do that, or the people that have your best interest, tell you the things that you don't necessarily want to hear, right? So I feel like that's where we kind of battle with athletes sometimes too, right? Like we're that figure for them that tells them the things they need to hear, but a lot of people don't want to hear those things, right? So the ones that can accept that, I think we see grow like way more, at a crazy rate, and they, have success for years and years, and not just, one competition or one thing.
Yeah, I
right?
think it kind of boils down to this. Like, if you want extraordinary results and you want to live an extraordinary life, so just extraordinary just means out of the ordinary, right? If you want to live a life that is not maybe an average life, or if you want to be not an average athlete, you have to do things that others don't do, right? Like you can't, if you want to live an extraordinary life, you have to make sacrifices. Like the reason that something is average is because that's what most people do, right? That's what makes it average. So I always used to, I think my dad said this, he would say like, listen, everybody goes to practice, right? Every athlete, like in your conference, let's say I was playing basketball, every athlete goes to practice. We all have 3-hour practices after school, every single one of you. So why are some better than others? Right? Yeah, of course, natural talent's part of that, but it's what they're doing outside of practice. It's the decisions they're making outside of practice to not go party, to not do some of these things, right? But again, I think you just have to decide, like, if you want to have the life that everybody else has, or you want to be, have the athletic career that everybody else around you has, then do all the things that they do, right? If you want to be as good as your friends are that are like partying like crazy and doing all these things, right? Or just not putting in time outside of practice, if you want to be as good as they want to be or as good as they are, then do the things that they do.
Yep.
If you want to be better than that, then you have to do different behaviors.
Yeah.
I think that's like it's an input versus output equation. Like what you put in is what you get out. And if you put in the same inputs as everybody else, you're going to get the same outputs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So, anyways, I didn't want to go too long on this one.
Yeah.
Just to wrap it up here. And
sure.
anything you got to say?
No. Looking forward to the next episode. This is going to get better each time.
Episode 3 of the Richmond Elite Podcast.
Yep.
We're working on it, guys, so bear with us. Stay tuned for episode 4.
Go Bears.
Go Bears. The Bears.